There are $2 sitting in a coffee can on my windowsill right now, and they're the most expensive money I have ever owned. Not because of what they're worth, because of what they cost me to understand. My name is June Calloway, and when my Uncle Walt died, his lawyer read me a will that left me exactly $2. One folded bill, one loose. I sat in that office, and I felt my whole family watching me, and I felt my face go hot, and I told myself I would not cry until I got to the car. I cried for 2 months instead. I'm telling you this now at the beginning, because I want you to know how wrong a person can be about almost everything that matters. I want you to know that I spent 8 weeks believing the man who raised me through every summer of my childhood had thought I was worth $2. And I want you to know what was actually waiting for me 60 miles past the last paved road, behind a gate nobody in my family knew existed. The desert keeps secrets better than people do. I learned that the hard way. If you're enjoying the story so far, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe. Drop a comment telling me where in the world you're watching from. I love hearing from you. Let me take you back to the beginning, to the kitchen and the heat, and the year I learned that the people who love you most are sometimes the people who say the least. I grew up in a town called Sumner Flat, which sits at the edge of the high desert in Nevada, where the sagebrush gives up and the real emptiness begins. It's not a place people move to. It's a place people are from, and then leave, and then sometimes come back to when they've run out of better ideas. My mother left when I was 4. I don't remember her face without a photograph to help me. My father stayed, mostly, in the way that a man stays when staying is just a path of least resistance. He worked the night shift at the gravel plant and slept through the days, and somewhere in there I raised myself on cereal and library books and the long flat afternoons that small-town kids know better than anyone. But the summers belonged to Uncle Walt. Walt was my father's older brother, and he was nothing like my father. Where Dad was soft and tired and absent even when he was in a room, Walt was sun-cured and quiet and entirely present. He had hands like dried leather, and a way of looking at a problem that made it seem smaller. He drove an old Ford with a bench seat and a crack in the windshield shaped like a river, and every June, the day school let out, he'd pull into our gravel driveway and honk twice, and I'd come running with a bag already packed. "You ready to be useful?" he'd say. That was his hello. His place was 40 minutes outside town, a low adobe house and a few outbuildings on a stretch of scrub. He called a homestead, though I never saw him plant anything that wasn't cactus or onions. He kept goats. He fixed engines for the ranchers out past the dry lake. He read at night by a kerosene lamp even though he had electricity, because he said the lamp made the words feel like they were worth something. I spent every summer of my childhood out there. He taught me how to change a tire and how to read the sky for weather and how to find water by watching where the animals walked at dusk. He taught me that you never waste anything in the desert, not water, not daylight, not words. Most people talk to fill the quiet, he told me once. Quiet doesn't need filling. It needs respecting. He never told me he loved me. Not once in 26 years. I want you to hold on to that, because it's going to matter. What he did instead was this. When I was 9 and terrified of the dark, he sat with me on the porch every night for a week without saying a word, until the dark stopped being a thing that wanted me and became just the dark. When I was 15 and my father forgot my birthday, Walt showed up at the school with a truck cake from the grocery store and ate half of it with me in the parking lot, and never once mentioned my dad. When I was 19 and dropped out of community college because I couldn't afford the second year, he didn't lecture me. He just put a wrench in my hand and said, "All right, let's make you good at something nobody can take away." I became a mechanic, a good one. By the time I was 24, I had a steady job at a shop in Sumner Flat, and a small apartment over the laundromat, and a life that was modest and mine. Walt would come by on Sundays sometimes and sit in the corner of the garage drinking coffee and watching me work, and he'd say things like, "You torqued that, right?" And I'd say, "Yes, Walt," and that was a whole conversation. And it was enough. The rest of the family was different. There was my Aunt Atrice, Walt's younger sister, who'd moved to the city decades ago and married into money and came back twice a year, wearing sunglasses she never took off, talking about how she couldn't understand why anyone would choose to live out here. There was her son, my cousin Brent, who sold real estate in a place with palm trees and called everyone champ and had a handshake like a closing pitch. And there was my father, who by then had drifted so far into his own quiet that he was barely a person to me anymore, more like weather, something that happened in the next room. To all of them, Walt was an embarrassment. The brother who never made anything of himself. The hermit on the scrubland with his goats and his broken-down trucks. Patrice used to say it at Thanksgiving. Every year, the same line. Walter could have done anything. He just didn't have the ambition. And everyone would nod, and I would sit there with my jaw tight, because I knew something they didn't. I knew Walt was the only one of them worth a damn. What I didn't know, what none of us knew, was that Walt had spent 30 years building something out there in the empty country that would make every assumption my family ever held about him collapse into dust. I didn't know it the summer I was 9, or the year he put the wrench in my hand, or the Sunday before he died. I found out in a lawyer's office, $2 at a time, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Walt died in March. A heart that just stopped one night while he was reading by his lamp. The rancher who found him said the book was still open on his chest, and I've never been able to find out what book it was. And that small not knowing is one of the things that still wakes me up at 3 in the morning. He was 68. He left no instructions about a funeral. So we had a small one, and Patrice flew in with her sunglasses, and Brent shook everyone's hand, and my father stood at the back and left before it ended. And 11 days later, we all gathered in the office of a lawyer named Mr. Aldous Reyes to hear the reading of the will. That's where everything I thought I understood came apart. The lawyer's office was in the county seat, an hour from Sumner Flat, in a squat brick building between a tax preparer and a shuttered video store. Mr. Reyes was older than I expected, maybe 70, with white hair and a stillness about him that reminded me, oddly, of Walt. He had a way of waiting before he spoke that made you feel he was choosing his words from a smaller, more careful supply than most people kept on hand. We sat in a row of chairs facing his desk. Patrice in the middle, perfume filling the room. Brent beside her in a suit that cost more than my truck, already checking his phone. My father at the end, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. And me, in my one good shirt, with grease I couldn't quite scrub out from under my fingernails. I want to be honest about what I expected. I didn't expect the house. I figured that would go to Patrice, or it'd get sold and split. But I expected something. A tool, the truck with the river crack in the windshield, the kerosene lamp, maybe some small thing that said, "You mattered to me, kid," some object I could keep on a shelf and touch when the missing got bad. Patrice expected the money. You could see it in how she sat, spine straight, hands folded, the patient posture of a woman waiting for what she's owed. Brent expected the land. He'd already mentioned twice in the hallway that raw acreage out there might actually move in the right market. My father, I think, expected nothing, and for once in his life, he was almost right. Mr. Reyes put on his glasses. He read the preamble, the legal language, the sound of mind clauses, and then he came to the distribution. And the room got very quiet, and I learned what my uncle thought I was worth. To my sister, Patrice Calloway haunts, Mr. Reyes read. I leave the residence and all structures at the Sumner Flat homestead, together with the 80 acres of record on which they sit and the contents therein. Patrice exhaled, a small, satisfied sound. She'd gotten a house and the land and everything in it, and her face did a thing where she tried to look grieved and relieved at the same time, and managed neither. To my nephew, Brent Hantz, I leave my truck, my tools, and the sum of $12,000. Brent nodded like a man accepting a deal he'd negotiated himself. $12,000 in a truck he'd sell by Friday. To my brother, Daniel Calloway, I leave the books in the East Room and my hope that he reads them. My father didn't react at all. The books and a barbed sentence. And he absorbed both the way he absorbed everything, without a ripple. And then Mr. Reyes paused. He looked up over the rims of his glasses, and he found me, just for a second. There was something in that look I didn't understand at the time, something that wasn't pity and wasn't apology, something almost like a question. Then he looked back down at the page. To my niece, June Calloway, he read, I leave the sum of $2. I heard it. I just didn't understand it. $2, he said again gently, as if he knew I'd need it repeated. The room moved around me. I felt Patrice turn to look at me, and I felt the corner of Brent's mouth do something, and I felt my father not move at all, and the heat came up my neck and into my face like a tide. $2. After every summer. After the wrench and the cake, and the porch and the dark. After 26 years of being the only one who showed up, the only one who stayed. $2. Mr. Reyes reached into his desk drawer. He took out a small envelope, my name written on it in Walt's blocky, all capital hand, and he slid it across the desk to me. I opened it with shaking fingers. Inside were 2 bills, one folded in half, one loose. That was it. That was the whole inheritance. I don't remember standing up. I remember Patrice saying something. I think it was meant to be kind, which made it worse. Something like, "Oh, honey," in the voice you'd use on a child who'd lost a balloon. I remember Brent saying to no one, "Well, that's awkward." I remember my father not saying anything, which was the most familiar thing in the world, and somehow the loudest. I remember telling myself, "Do not cry until the car." I made it to the car. Barely. I sat in my truck in the lot outside that brick building with the $2 in my fist, and I cried like something inside me had broken loose and was trying to get out through my eyes. I cried for the uncle I thought I'd had. I cried for the version of him I'd carried around my whole life, the one who put the wrench in my hand and said, "Let's make you good at something nobody can take away." That man would not have left me $2. That man would not have humiliated me in a room full of the people who'd always looked down on both of us. So either I'd never known him at all, or he'd stopped being himself somewhere near the end. And I didn't know which possibility hurt worse. I drove home with the windows down and the desert going by in a brown blur, and I made a decision in that hour that I am not proud of. I decided I was done. Done with the family. Done with the memory. Done with the homestead and the porch and the kerosene lamp. I decided that the $2 was a truth, and everything else had been a story I'd told myself, because I was a lonely kid who needed somebody to be the good one. I put the $2 in the coffee can. I don't know why I didn't just spend them or throw them away. Maybe some part of me wasn't done. But I shoved that into the back of a shelf. And I went to work the next morning, and I tried to become a person who'd never had an Uncle Walt at all. It didn't take. The 2 months that followed were the worst of my life, and I've had some bad ones to compare them against. It wasn't grief, exactly. Grief I knew how to carry. I'd been practicing since I was 4 years old. This was something uglier. It was grief with a splinter in it. Every time I started to miss him, the $2 would surface in my mind and turn the missing into anger, and then the anger would burn out and leave me ashamed for being angry at a dead man, and then the shame would loop me back around to missing him, and the whole thing would start again. I wasn't sleeping. I was making mistakes at the shop, small ones, the kind that a mechanic talked about. My boss, a decent man named Hollis, pulled me aside one afternoon and said, "June, whatever's eating you, it's eating my brake jobs too." Patrice called once, about 3 weeks in. I almost didn't answer. She wanted to tell me she was putting the homestead on the market. "There's just no sense in holding on to it," she said. "Brent says the acreage isn't worth what we hoped, out that far from anything, but a buyer's a buyer." She paused, and then she said the thing she called to say. "You know, June, I always thought Walter was unfair to you. The way he kept you out there working all summer like a hired hand. A child shouldn't be raised in all that dirt and silence. I'm sure the $2 was his way of, well, letting you go, so you wouldn't feel obligated to a place like that." I hung up on her. I sat on my floor and shook. But here's the thing about what she said. It got into me. Letting you go. Maybe that's what it was. Maybe Walt had looked at me and seen a kid who'd gotten stuck in his orbit, who'd become a mechanic in a dying town. Because that's what he'd shaped me into. And maybe the $2 was a door he was holding open. Go. Be more than this. Don't end up like me. I tried that story on for a while. It hurt less than the others. It still wasn't right, but I didn't know that yet. I started avoiding the parts of town that reminded me of him. The grocery store where he bought the truck cake. The road that turned off toward the homestead. I gave away a jacket of his I'd been keeping. I realize now, trying before an amputation on my own past, and you cannot do that no matter how sharp the knife. About 7 weeks in, my father did something he hadn't done in years. He came to see me. He stood in the doorway of my apartment, looking smaller than I remembered, and he said he'd been thinking about Walt, and could he come in? I let him. We sat at my little table, and he turned a coffee mug around and around in his hands without drinking from it, and finally he said, "He wasn't trying to hurt you," with the $2. "How would you know?" I said. "You barely talked to him for 30 years. "Because I knew him before all of you," my father said, before he went quiet. "When we were young, Walt was the kind of person who'd give you the shirt off his back and then apologize the shirt wasn't nicer. Whatever that $2 was, it wasn't him being cruel. He didn't have it in him, even at the end. It was the most my father had said to me in a decade, and it cracked something. Not all the way, but a hairline. Because he was right, wasn't he? The Walt I knew didn't have cruelty in him. So if the $2 wasn't cruelty, what was it? Letting me go didn't fit either. Walt never did anything for show, and a $2 gesture in front of the whole family was nothing but show. It didn't add up. None of it added up. And the man I knew, the man who built engines that ran for 30 years and read his books by lamplight because the words deserve respect, that man did not deal in things that didn't add up. I started very slowly to wonder if I'd missed something. Then, in the 8th week, the phone rang. A number I didn't know, and a voice I half recognized, careful and unhurried, choosing its words in that smaller, more careful supply. "Miss Calloway," said Mr. Reyes. "This is Aldous Reyes, your uncle's attorney." A pause. "I wonder if you might be free to take a drive with me. There's something I was instructed to show you, but not until 2 months had passed, and the 2 months are up." I almost said no. I want you to know that. I came that close to telling the old lawyer that I'd had enough of my uncle's instructions, that $2 had been instruction enough, and to lose my number. But the careful way he said it, instructed to show you, but not until 2 months had passed, caught on something in me. Walt did everything for a reason. He timed everything. He never planted before the last frost and never harvested before the moon was right. And if he'd told this lawyer to wait exactly 2 months, then the 2 months meant something. "Show me what?" I said. "I'd rather not say over the phone," Mr. Reyes said. "Your uncle was specific about that. He said, and I'm quoting him, 'Don't tell her. Drive her. She spent her whole life being told things. Let her see one for herself.'" I put my hand over my mouth. That was Walt. That was him exactly. The cadence and everything. A dead man had reached through a telephone and grabbed me by the collar when I said, "Tomorrow, if you're able. It's a long drive. Wear something for the heat, and bring water. More than you think you'll need." A pause, and then, with what I'd later understand was the ghost of a smile in his voice, "Your uncle was very firm about the water. He picked me up the next morning in a dust-colored Land Cruiser that had clearly seen real country in its life. We drove out of Sumner Flat, past the Homestead turnoff. I watched it go by and felt nothing I could name. And then we kept going out past the dry lake, out where the pavement ended and the road became a graded track, and then barely a track at all. The mountains that had been a smudge on the horizon, my whole life got closer and turned real, all red rock and black volcanic spill. And the sky got bigger the way it only does when there's nothing left to interrupt it. We drove for almost 2 hours. Mr. Reyes didn't talk much, which I appreciated. Walt would have appreciated it, too. Once he said, "I knew your uncle 40 years. Did you know that?" I said I didn't. We met when he came to me about some land. I was a young man, full of opinions. He listened to every one of them, took the ones that were any good, and threw the rest away without ever making me feel foolish. He shook his head, eyes on the track. "I have had a great many clients, Miss Calloway. Walt Calloway is the only one I ever drove 2 hours into the desert to bury a secret for." I didn't know what to say to that, so I respected the quiet the way Walt taught me. We came over a low rise, and Mr. Reyes slowed the truck, and there in front of us was a gate. It wasn't much to look at. Heavy steel pipe, sun-faded, set between 2 posts of welded rail with a chain and a padlock. A simple thing, but it was maintained. The hinges were greased. The chain was oiled. In the middle of 100 miles of country that hadn't seen a human hand in a generation, here was a gate that someone had cared for recently and well. Beyond it, the track ran onto a fold in the hills where I could see the green, actual green, impossible green, a stand of cottonwoods where no cottonwoods had any business growing. "What is this?" I said. It didn't come out as a question. I don't think I was capable of a question right then. Mr. Reyes reached into his jacket and took out an envelope, the same blocky, all-capital hand, my name on the front, and clipped to it a key, old iron heavy, with a brass tag, and stamped into the tag 2 numbers. 2. I read aloud. The dollars. 2. He said you'd understand the 2 when you saw it, Mr. Reyes said. I confess I never did. He wouldn't explain it to me. He just laughed and said, "It's the cheapest thing I own and the most expensive lesson she'll ever learn." The old man held out the key. He asked me to let you open the gate yourself. My hands were not steady. I took the key and I got out of the truck, and the heat hit me like a hand, and I walked the gate through air that shimmered, and I put that old iron key into the oil padlock, and it turned like it had been waiting for me. The chain fell away. The gate swung open on its greased hinges without a sound. And I want to stop here just for a moment, because I need you to feel what I felt. I'd spent 2 months believing I was worth $2. I'd performed an amputation on the best part of my own childhood. I'd hung up on the memory of the one person who ever showed up for me. And now I was standing at a gate in the middle of nowhere with the desert ringing in my ears. And I had absolutely no idea what was on the other side. And for the first time in 8 weeks, I felt something other than the splinter. I felt the quiet. And the quiet, for once, did not hurt. If you're hooked on this story, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. Your support means everything and helps me bring you more emotional stories like this one. I got back in the truck. Mr. Reyes drove us through the open gate, and we went down into the fold in the hills, toward the impossible green, toward the thing my uncle had spent 30 years and his entire silence building. The track wound down between the red rock walls, and the temperature dropped, just slightly, the way it does when you come into the lee of something. And then the cottonwoods closed over us, and we were driving through actual shade, dappled green light moving over the hood of the truck. And I heard a sound I had not heard in the open desert in my entire life. Running water. Not a trickle, not the wishful drip of a seep. Running water. A real and steady voice of it, somewhere off to the left through the trees. I made a sound I'm not proud of, a kind of gasp, and Mr. Reyes glanced at me and said gently, "Wait, there's more." We came out of the cottonwoods into a clearing, and I saw the homestead. That's the only word for it, though it was nothing like Walt's place at Sumner Flat. This was built, a long, low house of the same adobe Walt loved, but bigger, set into the hillside so the earth itself kept it cool. A windmill turned slow and steady against the sky. There were 3 structures I didn't have names for yet, big sheds with roofs angled south, and the roofs were covered in something dark and gleaming that I realized, after a stupid second, were solar panels. Dozens of them, a whole field of them on the south-facing slope, drinking the same desert sun that had been trying to kill me all my life and turning it into something else. And the water. The water came from a spring at the head of the clearing, a real spring, bubbling up clear and cold out of rock, and Walt, it had to have been Walt, had channeled it into a series of stone-lined pools that stepped down the slope, and around the pools grew a garden that did not make sense in that country. Fruit trees, rows of vegetables, a grape arbor, bees, I could hear bees. In the middle of 100 miles of scrub that wouldn't grow a weed without a fight, my uncle had made a green and living place, and had hidden it so well that not one member of his family had ever known it existed. I got out of the truck, and I just stood there. I think I forgot how to operate my own body for a minute. "He found the spring almost 40 years ago," Mr. Reyes said, coming around the truck to stand beside me. "He was prospecting old claims, the way men out here used to. Most of those claims were worthless. But Walt didn't file on the gold that wasn't there. He filed on the water." The old man looked out at the green. "Do you understand what that means, Miss Calloway? In this state, in this country, water is the only thing that matters. He secured the water rights to a live spring on patented land decades ago when no one was looking and no one cared. And then, very quietly, he spent the rest of his life building something around it. I walked toward the spring. I couldn't help it. I knelt by the highest pool, and I put my hand into the water, and it was so cold it ached real and alive. And I thought of a man saying you find water by watching where the animals walk at dusk. And I thought of every summer he'd taught me to never waste a drop. And I understood, kneeling there, that he hadn't been teaching me how to survive a hard place. He'd been teaching me how to tend a place like this one. He'd been getting me ready for years. And I never knew. Why? I said. My voice didn't work right. Why would he keep it secret? Why would he live in that little house in town with his goats when he had this? Mr. Reyes was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Come inside. He left you a letter." He was a better explainer than I am. The inside of the house was cool and dim and smelled of adobe and dried herbs, and underneath it, the faint ghost of kerosene. There was a lamp on the table. Of course there was. The same kind he read by. I almost lost it right there. The house was simple, but it was rich in the way that mattered to Walt. Every object earned its place. Books, hundreds of them, more than the East Room he'd left my father. Tools, beautiful ones, oiled and racked. A workbench, a wall of small wooden drawers labeled in his blocky hand. Seeds, washers, fuses, and on the table, weighted down by a smooth river stone, a thick envelope with my name on it. I sat down in his chair. Mr. Reyes stepped back outside to give me the room, and I have always been grateful to him for knowing to do that. I broke the seal. The letter was long, pages of it, in pencil, his handwriting getting a little less steady toward the end in a way that told me he'd written it knowing his heart was failing. I'm not going to read you all of it. Some of it is mine, but I'll tell you what mattered. "June," it began, "if all this did his job, you're sitting in my chair, and you're angry at me, and you have been for about 2 months. Good. The anger was the price. I'll explain. You're going to want to know why the $2. Here's why. I have watched our family, my whole life, put a number on everything and everyone. Patrice put a number on me the day I chose this country over the city, and the number was 0. Your father put a number on himself a long time ago, and it broke my heart that I couldn't argue him up from it. And they were all going to put a number on you, June. The day I died, they were going to look at whatever I left you and decide that was what you were worth. And worse, you were going to believe them. You always believe them. It's the one thing I could never teach out of you. So I gave you $2. I gave you the smallest number I could think of, because I needed you to feel all the way down what it does to a person to be valued by someone else's reckoning. I needed it to hurt enough that you'd never let anyone do it to you again. I'm sorry. I am so sorry, kid. It is the cruelest thing I ever did, and I did it because it was the only way I knew to make the lesson stick. I had to stop reading. I sat in his chair, and I cried again, but it was different this time. It was a splinter coming out. Everything Patrice got, the house and the 80 acres in town, the letter went on, is worth maybe $90,000 on a good day. And she'll fight Brent over proceeds, and they'll both walk away feeling cheated, because people who count that way always do. The truck and the $12,000 to Brent, that's so he stops looking. A man like Brent, you give him a number he can put in his pocket, and he loses interest in the rest. The books to your father are the only honest thing I left in that office, and he won't read them, and that's its own kind of sad. And to you, June, I left $2 in front of all of them, and then I left you everything else, out here, where they will never think to look, because not one of them ever once wondered what I did with my time. They thought I did nothing. They thought I was nothing. Let them go on thinking it. It's the best protection this place could have. The water rights are filed in a trust, and the trust is in your name, and it had been since you were 19 years old, since the summer I put the wrench in your hand. The land is patented and clear. The solar array sells power back to the co-op 40 miles east, and has been quietly paying the taxes, and then some for 11 years. There's an account. All this has the papers. You will never have to fix another man's brakes for money again unless you want to. And I hope you want to, because you're good at it and good work is good work. But the money was never the point. The point is the place. The point is that there is one corner of this earth where the desert says yes instead of no. And I made it with my hands over 30 years. And I made it for you, because you're the only person alive who I ever trusted to understand that the water matters more than the gold. Everyone else in this family went looking for gold their whole lives. You're the only one who kneeled down and put your hand in the spring. Tend it. That's all. Tend it. And never again let anyone tell you what you're worth. You're worth the whole valley, June. You always were. I just couldn't say it out loud. You know I never could, so I built it instead. Walt, P.S. the $2. Keep them. One of them is the bus fare I used to come get you the first summer, when you were 9 and your daddy didn't know what to do with you. The other one is a change I got back. I've kept them in a can for 17 years. They're the best $2 I ever spent. Now they're yours. I don't remember walking back outside. I remember Mr. Reyes was sitting on a stone bench by the lowest pool in the shade of the cottonwoods, and I came and sat beside him with a letter in my lap, and the spring talking quietly in front of us, and for a long time neither of us said anything, and the bees worked the arbor, and the windmill turned. Finally I said, he knew, the whole time, every summer, he was getting me ready for this. Yes, said Mr. Reyes, and the $2 wasn't to hurt me. It was to inoculate me. I was crying and laughing at the same time, which is a thing I didn't know a body could do. He gave me the worst thing, so I'd never be afraid of it again. That's the closest anyone has come to explaining it, the old man said. I drove him out here a dozen times over the years to check on the ray, the water, the trees. Every time, he'd stand right about where you're standing, and he'd say the same thing. He'd say, June's going to be standing here someday, and she's going to think I'm the smartest fool who ever lived. Mr. Reyes smiled, fully this time. He was both, I think, the smartest fool I ever met. I asked him the question that had been forming since the gate. What do I do about the family? Patrice is selling the homestead. Brent's already got his hand out. The minute they find out about this place, they won't find out unless you tell them, Mr. Reyes said. The trust is private. The land is 60 miles from the last paved road, and it's not in any of their names, and it never was. Legally, June, this is yours, completely and quietly, and there is nothing any of them can do about it. The only question is whether you want them to know. I thought about that for a long time. I thought about Patrice and her sunglasses and her, oh, honey. I thought about Brent saying, well, that's awkward in a room while I was breaking. I thought about how good it would feel, just for a second, to drive them all out here and watch their faces fall, to make them understand exactly how wrong they'd been about Walt and about me. And then I thought about Walt, who never wasted a word, who never did anything for show, who gave Brent a number to pocket. So he'd lose interest and gave Patrice a house to squabble over so she'd stay busy. Walt didn't want me to win against them. Walt wanted me free of them. Those aren't the same thing. It took me kneeling by that spring to understand they aren't the same thing at all. No, I said, I don't think I'll tell them. Mr. Reyes nodded slowly, like I'd passed something. He bet you'd say that, he said. It's been 3 years now. I kept my job at the shop for a while, because Walt was right. Good work is good work, and Hollis is a decent man, and I wasn't ready to be a person with nowhere to be. But on the weekends, I started driving out. 2 hours each way, past the homestead turnoff, past the dry lake, out to the gate with the oiled hinges. I'd open it with the 2-stamp key and drive down to the cottonwoods and tend the place. I learned the solar array. I learned the pumps and the channels, and which trees needed what. I made mistakes. The first summer, I let a whole row of tomatoes burn because I didn't understand the shade cloth, and I sat in the dirt and cried, and then I figured out the way Walt figured everything out by paying attention and not quitting. The family scattered, more or less. Patrice sold the homestead in town for less than she hoped and got into a long, cold fight with Brent over the split, exactly as Walt predicted. And the two of them barely speak now. Brent sold the truck by Friday, just like I knew he would, and spent the $12,000 on something I never asked what. My father reads now a little. He found one of the books from the East Room that he liked, and it led him to another. And last Christmas he gave me a paperback he thought I'd enjoy, and it was the first present he'd chosen for me in 20 years, and I have it on the shelf next to the coffee can. The coffee can is on my windowsill out at the valley now. $2 in it. One folded, one loose. The bus fare and the change. I look at them every morning while the coffee brews and the spring runs and the sun comes up over the red rock and starts pouring itself into the panels. Free money out of an empty sky. The way my uncle figured out 40 years ago when no one was looking. I quit the shop last spring, finally, not because I had to, because I wanted to give my whole self to the valley, the way Walt did. I'm planting more cottonwoods. The spring could support them. I've done the measurements careful, the way he taught me. In 30 years, there'll be a rail forest down in that fold in the hills, in the middle of country that says no to everything, and I won't be around to see it full grown, and that's all right. He wasn't around to see this. You don't tend a place like this for yourself. You tend it for whoever kneels by the spring after you're gone. I don't have a kid to leave it to. Not yet, maybe not ever, I don't know. But there's a girl in Sumner Flat, the daughter of one of the ranchers out past the dry lake, and she's 9 years old, and her mother doesn't quite know what to do with her, and she's been hanging around the shop on the days I still go in to help Hollis, watching me work, asking questions, taking things apart. Last month, I put a wrench in her hand. You ready to be useful? I said. She looked at me like I'd offered her the whole world, which, I'm starting to understand, is exactly what I'd done. Her name is Maddie. I should tell you that, because she's a person and not just a piece of the story coming full circle, though she's that too. She's all elbows and questions, the kind of kid who'd rather know how a thing works than whether it's hers to touch. The first afternoon she watched me pull a water pump apart of the shop, she didn't say a word for 2 hours. And then on her way out the door, she asked me why the impeller had 7 blades and not 6, and I didn't have an answer, and I went home and looked it up so I'd have one for her the next time. That's the thing nobody tells you about teaching. The kid teaches you to keep up. I didn't tell her about the valley right away. I want to be honest about that. There's a part of me, even now, that holds a place close, that gets nervous when a new person learns it exists, because I spent 2 months thinking I'd been left nothing, and the habit of guarding what you got dies hard. But one Saturday last fall, I had a pump to rebuild out there, the deep one that feeds the lower pools, and her mother needed a day to herself, and I heard myself say, "You want to see where I really work?" before I decided to. We drove the 2 hours. She fell asleep somewhere past a dry lake, the way I used in Walt's truck, her head against the window and her mouth open, and I drove with one eye on the road and one on her, and felt something I didn't have a word for. When we came over the rise and she saw the gate, she woke up like she'd been called. "Why is there a gate?" she said. "If there's nothing out here." "Because there's something out here," I said, and handed her the key. I let her open it, the 2-stamped iron key in her small hands, the oiled lock turning, the gate swinging silent on its hinges. I watched her face the way Mr. Reyes must have watched mine, and I understood, finally and all the way down, why Walt made the old man drive me instead of telling me. Some things have to come up through your own hands, or they don't take root. She drove the rest of the way down to the cottonwoods on my lap, steering while I worked the pedals, both of us pretending she was doing alone, and when the green opened up in front of us and the spring came into view, she went so quiet I thought something was wrong. "It's not real," she finally said. "It's real," I said. "Somebody made it real. Took him 30 years. She spent the whole day with her hand in the water. I didn't have to teach her that part. She just walked to the highest pool, the way I did, and knelt down and put her hand in the cold of it, and she stayed there so long her fingers went white, and I let her, because I remembered that season tested me harder than any since the first. We had a dry winter, the kind the old ranchers talk about in low voices, and the spring dropped. Not a lot. A few inches off the highest pool, a slowing in the voice of the water that I felt before I measured. But out here a few inches is the difference between a living place and a dying one, and I spent 3 weeks in a low panic, certain I'd done something wrong, certain I'd be the one who let Walt's valley go brown after he'd kept it green for 30 years. I went back through his notebooks. He'd left dozens of them, and I'd read them once, fast, the way you read something you think you already understand. This time I read them the way he read his books by lamplight, like the words were worth something, and I found it in a margin in pencil in his blocky hand. Dry year drops the spring. Don't fight it. Pull water off the lower trees. Let them sleep. Save the cottonwoods at the head. They're the anchor. Everything else can come back. Lose the anchor and you lose the valley. He'd lived through dry years. Of course he had. He'd written me a letter for one without knowing which year it'd be, the same way he wrote me a letter for the day he died, without knowing the day. The man had been talking to me for 40 years, and I was only now learning to hear all of it. So I did what he said. I let the lower trees sleep. I rationed the pools. I cried again once, standing in the dust with the shade cloth in my hands, the way I cried over the tomatoes, But this time I didn't sit down in it. I figured it out, and I didn't quit. And in March the snow came late and hard to high country, and the spring came back up its few inches, and the lower trees woke, and the valley held. I kept it. The first thing I ever kept that was bigger than me. The family found out about the valley last year. I knew they would eventually. Brent, of all people, working some county records angle for a client, stumbled onto a water rights filing and a trust with my name on it and a parcel he couldn't place. And he called me, and I could hear the old hunger in his voice under the "Hey, champ." He wanted to know what it was. He'd done the math on a live spring in patented land in a state where water is everything, and the number he'd arrived had brought him back around like a dog to a smell. I thought about lying. I thought about the satisfaction of the truth, too, of saying, "Yes, Brent, Walt left me a fortune you'll never touch. The man you all called nothing built a paradise and gave it to the one of us you looked down on most." I had both speeches ready. I'd had them ready for 3 years. What I said was, "It's some scrubland Walt left in a trust. There's a seep out there, mostly dry. I go out and check on it. You're welcome, come see it sometime." And I meant it. The invitation, in the way you mean an offer you know won't be taken, because Brent will never drive 2 hours passing the road to look at scrubland and a seep. There's no number in it for him that he can hold without doing the work, and a man like Brent loses interest the second the work shows up. Walt taught me that, too, in the will, in the $12,000 he handed Brent like a bone. You give him a number he can put in his pocket, and he loses interest in the rest. He lost interest. He never came. Patrice never knew to ask. And the valley stayed mine, and stayed quiet, and stayed safe, exactly the way Walt designed it to, by being hidden in plain sight inside a family that never once wondered what the quiet brother did with his time. I understood, when I hung up the phone that day, that I'd passed the same test twice. The first time, 3 years ago, sitting by the lowest pool with Mr. Reyes, choosing not to drive them all out here and watch their faces fall. And again, on the phone with Brent, choosing the small true lie over the large true triumph. Walt never wanted me to win against them. He wanted me free of them. I'd finally learned the difference all the way through, and I think that's the thing he was really leaving me. More than the water, more than the panels, more than the money in the account I still mostly don't touch. He left me a way of being a person that doesn't need anyone else's reckoning to stand up straight. My father came out to the valley once, near the end of last summer. I drove him myself, the way Mr. Reyes drove me, and I didn't tell him what he'd see, because some things have to come up through your own hands. He stood at the head of the spring for a long time, an old man who'd put a number on himself a lifetime ago and never argued his way up from it, and he looked at what his brother had made in secret over 30 years, and he said the truest thing he's ever said to me. He was the best of us, my father said, and we spent our whole lives telling him he was the worst. And he stopped, he put his hand in the water, the way we all do, the way it seems you can't help doing. He just went and built this, without telling anybody, so that being right wouldn't cost him being kind. He took his hand out and looked at it like it belonged to someone else. I wish I'd known him, my own brother. I wish I'd driven out here while he was still alive and put my hand in this water and told him I was sorry for the number. He knew, Dad. I said, though I don't know if it's true. I think it's a kind thing that's allowed to be a lie. Quiet doesn't need filling. He told me that. He'd have heard you without you saying it. We stood there a while. The bees worked the arbor. The windmill turned. And I thought that maybe the valley wasn't only Walt's gift to me. Maybe it was his last argument to the whole family. The one he couldn't make with words because he never could. The one that only works if you drive out passing the road and kneel down and feel the cold of it for yourself. Here's what nothing built. Here's what the man you valued at zero made out of an empty sky and 40 years of paying attention. Now tell me again what a person is worth. Maddie comes out most weekends now. Her mother trusts me with her, which is its own quiet miracle, and the two of them have started coming together sometimes. And the valley is learning the sound of more than one voice for the first time in its life. Maddie's got a notebook going, her own blocky printing, because she copies mine and I copy Walt's. And she writes down what the spring does and which trees need what and why the impeller has 7 blades, which she figured out herself in the end, and explained to me with enormous patience. She'll be 11 this winter. In 30 years, she'll be standing at the head of the spring under cottonwoods I planted, and didn't live to see full grown, and she'll have a kid of her own maybe, all elbows and questions, and she'll hand them a wrench or a key or whatever the tool is by then, and she'll say you're ready to be useful, and not one of them will ever have to cry for 2 months to learn what they're worth. That's the whole inheritance. That's what gets passed down. Not the water, not the panels, not the money, the kneeling, the way of seeing, the refusal to take the world's number for the true one. People spend their whole lives looking for gold. My uncle taught me that the gold was never the thing. The water was the thing. The quiet was the thing. The kneeling down and putting your hand in the cold of it and understanding that you've been given something you can't measure and don't deserve and have to spend the rest of your life earning anyway. $2, the cheapest thing he owned and the most expensive lesson I'll ever learn. I cried for 2 months because I thought it meant I was worth nothing. It meant I was worth the whole valley. I just had to drive out past the end of the road to find out. There's one more thing I want to tell you, and then I'll let you go. A few weeks ago, I replaced the padlock on the gate. The old one was finally giving out. The one Walt had oiled and cared for all those years. The one his iron key turned the first day Mr. Reyes drove me out. The new lock came with 2 shiny brass keys on a little ring. The disposable kind, the kind that mean nothing. I stood there at the gate with the new lock in one hand and the old iron key in the other, and I couldn't do it. I couldn't put a meaningless key on that gate. So I drove the old key into town to a man who does engraving for the ranchers, trophy buckles and memorial plates and the like, and I had to make a tag for the new key. Brass, like the old one. And I had him stamp it with a number, the way Walt stamped his. Not 2. I thought about 2 for a long time, the way you'd return to the first chapter of a thing. But 2 was Walt's number, the bus fare and the change, the cheapest thing he owned. It was his lesson, and I'd already learned it, and you don't keep teaching yourself a lesson that's taken. I had him stamp it with a number of cottonwoods at the head of the spring. There are 11 now, counting the ones I planted, and I keep a running count because Walt kept a running count of everything that mattered to him, and the trees are what matter to me. 11, the anchor, the thing you save when the dry year comes, and everything else has to sleep. When Maddie's old enough, I'll give her the gate. Not sell it. Not will it in a lawyer's office in front of people who will put a number on her. Just give it to her, hand to hand. The iron key and the brass tag and the count of the trees. On some ordinary afternoon when there's no occasion and no audience and nothing to perform. I'll drive her out past the end of the road and let her open the gate herself. And I won't explain it, because some things have to come up through your own hands. And the number on the tag will be different by then. There'll be more trees. There's always more trees. If you tend the water and don't fight the dry years and refuse to quit on the thing that's bigger than you. That's what it gave me. Not a fortune. A way of counting. The right things in the right order for the right reasons. $2 at the bottom, where you start. The whole green valley at the top, where you end up if you're patient and you pay attention and you let the quiet be quiet. I cried for 2 months because I thought I was worth nothing. I'll spend the rest of my life learning I was worth the whole valley. And so, are you? You just might have to drive out past the end of your own road to find it. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you love this story, check out the other videos on your screen now. I think you'll really enjoy them. And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. See you in the next story.